And we are live. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Rosenbauer from the Orvis Company, and today we have Hannah Perkins, a product developer from the Orvis Company, and Hannah's cousin Simon Perkins, the president and CEO of the Orvis Company, and Captain Benny Blanco from Islamorada, Florida. And we're going to be talking about the Everglades and a new film that just came out. And hopefully, many of you have seen this film. It's called Follow the Water. And you can find it. We'll post a link if you haven't seen it in the chat in a second. But it can be found on the Orvis YouTube channel, on the Orvis website. Where else? Is that it? The full link, just there, right, Simon?
Yeah.
And there,
and everywhere, I think it was just put in the chat. So everywhere else that was put in the chat.
Yeah. So I'm going to shut up and let you guys talk because you're the stars of the show. And maybe just start out, Simon, by talking about why Orvis decided to make this film.
Yeah. So, so I think there are a couple of things that are worth touching on. First off, when we talk about the Everglades, many people know this, but it really hits home when you get to be right in the middle of that entire system. I mean, it was one of the most incredible ecosystems we have in this country, and that was one of the things we tried to do in the film, was really show all the different pieces of it, because we're talking about just this huge dynamic ecosystem that has over 2,000 species of plants and animals, and it's just one of the most iconic places in the country to fish. And we're also talking about what is the biggest water restoration project ever attempted in this country, and Orvis has a history of conservation, and specifically water conservation. And so there's sort of a natural fit there for why we care and why this is interesting, because at the end of the day, not only is it about preserving this incredible place that means so much to everybody within sort of the extended Orvis family, whether it's customers, employees, partners in Florida, but it's really relevant on a national level. It's, tourism is Florida's #1 economy, and so these types of places are special to and meaningful to many across the country. I'll also say that it's personal as well. It was back in the 40s when our grandfather first started going to the Everglades. It was before it was even made a national park, and it was during a time when he'd try to find a charter he'd be fishing with his mother, and he'd try to find a charter captain and to get them to take them on a boat to certain areas, and then they'd fly fish, which raised a lot of eyebrows at that time. But he just fell in love with the place, and it started a lifelong relationship that was really, really special for him. And as many people know, when one of your grandparents loves something, usually your parents end up loving something. And Hannah and I found that, and then you yourself are conditioned by it. But we felt it first and foremost. I mean, it was the place where our grandfather spent every single one of his birthdays. He'd spend 2 weeks and go with his close friends and family into the middle of the Everglades on a houseboat, fish all day long, explore the resource, just loved sort of being there. And so, and so, Orvis being a family company, those lines sometimes blur. And so for about 30 years, Orvis, both as a brand and company, and also on a personal level, whether it's our grandfather or our parents or us, have been involved with really trying to figure out if there is a way for this resource to be around for future generations. Because I remember a conversation I had not too long ago with my dad. He was saying he wasn't sure he'd ever see a day in his lifetime when he'd really be optimistic about a sustainable Everglades ecosystem in the future for future generations to benefit. And that's changed in the last couple of years. And so that's a big deal.
Huge deal. This is the largest restoration project ever in the history of the United States, right?
Yeah, yeah. Benny was the one that actually told us about that. I don't know if you've more to speak to on that, Benny.
The largest in the United States, and I would venture to say that it's probably the largest ongoing in the planet. Um, it certainly is the largest ongoing right now, and as evidenced by the traction it has everywhere you look. But for sure in the United States it's the largest. Nothing even closely compares monetarily, length of time wise, and then overall impact.
Hannah, was this the first time you had seen the Everglades when you went down to do the film?
Yeah, it was my first time really experiencing them. I think when I was younger, I'd gone down with my dad in the past, but completely different perspective as a kid. You're going to the ocean, and that's good enough. This was my first time down, and it was incredible. And I'm passionate about nature and conservation in general, so it wasn't very hard to convince me to go on the trip. And obviously, had heard a lot about the Everglades and supported any project or any bill or anything I could sign on to help with their efforts. But it was my first time going down, and now it's stuck with me for the rest of my life. I will continue to go down. Incredible place, and it was an incredible experience. I don't think a lot of people have the privilege to do what I got to do, which follow the water all the way down. You really get the insight. So it was a fantastic time.
Whose idea was it where did the idea come from to follow the water from source to Florida Bay?
As I understand it, I mean, so I think where it started was, I mean, just to pull back the curtains a little bit on how we like to operate at Orvis when it comes to conservation is, we for decades sort of our approach has been finding the issues that really kind of need our help and that can impact a ton of people or a ton of or a certain habitat or a certain region. And then, there's so many amazing people doing incredible work in these places. You find the right partners and you figure out how to support them and help them. They're great at what they do and help sort of give them a tailwind and then figure out the ways in which we can support. And so, when we're thinking about this decades long involvement with the Everglades, we're at a point right now where, 2 decades and billions of dollars into this, the finish line's in sight. There's still a lot of work to do, but there's a belief now that we can do this. We got, Benny can talk about it better than anybody, but if we take our eye off this, all that could be for lost. But it's right. But the finish line is there on the horizon. There's some people that think that this could be done by the end of the decade. But so anyway, we're sitting here saying, okay, this is a critical time to ensure that that this Everglades project can actually get done. And so when we're thinking about what we could do to help, it's really at this point we have experts on the ground, whether it's Everglades Foundation, Captains for Clean Water, which Benny's a part of. They're great people doing great work. We thought, okay, the biggest way we can add value right now is to really use our platform to help tell this story. And so when we were thinking about the story, we were thinking about, okay, how do we help make this digest? It's such a big project with so many different elements and so many different things connected to it. And there are people that are so close to it and understand all the intricacies of it and all the dimensions of it, but that can get pretty confusing pretty quickly. And so we were trying to think, how do we tell it in a way, because it is of national interest, how do we tell it in a way that is really digestible, that people can really understand and they can really get behind it? And the idea popped up that maybe one of the best ways to tell the story is to travel and show and break it down into something that a lot of people can understand, because people, I think, try to view it as a bunch of different systems. This is something Benny and others have talked about a lot, but it's all one system. And so how do we best show that it is a system that's connected in all these different ways, and it really needs to work as one continuous system for it to be effective?
And Benny, there was recently a threat to this whole project not too long ago, and it was really stopped by a grassroots effort, really by I think mostly charter boat captains. You want to talk a little bit about that? And
It was, and the timing was pretty significant. Honestly, I believe we had a conference call for this film in February, and my response to the email was, I can't right now. We have a drastic and immediate emergency in Tallahassee, and I'll have to get back to you guys later. And was at the time I didn't really register, but it was very timely response from Tucker, from Orvis, saying, you go handle what you have to go handle. And what he didn't understand, and I didn't even understand it at the time, was how important that drastic call was. And for me, I mean, it is absolutely defining moment in Everglades restoration history. For the first time in over 50 years, the people stood up and would not accept a special interest offer to change our restoration efforts. And we went there and voiced our opinions, and against, the typical operations in Florida politics, when they told us that we didn't know what we were talking about, that we shouldn't be there, that, that we, were misinformed, and they're very sorry that we wasted our time, and all the typical lines that you hear throughout, the history of politics. We stood strong, and we rallied the entire community, 50,000 signatures from across the country, with representation in every single state, thousands of phone calls, thousands of emails. The first trip, 40 guides dropped what they were doing, including me. I was literally on a fishing trip. I got the call. I told my client the day was over. At the end of the night, I had 30-something other guides ready. And the next morning we were in Tallahassee. And then 2 weeks later, we did the same thing. We had to keep it quiet on social to get there, because we didn't want to tip our hat to the special interest groups that we were fighting. And several hundred guides gave up their days and showed up in Tallahassee. And we parked our boats on the front lawn of the Capitol. And, we were welcomed by everyone in Tallahassee. The police officers welcomed us in, and it's pretty, it's not coincidental that night that we showed up in Tallahassee, that all of the legislators decided that they were going to file an amendment. They were going to get together and amend that bill and take out all that bad language. If we didn't have the ability to reach each other so quickly through social media, if we didn't have large industry partners like Orvis using their platforms, none of that would have been possible. And once again, that we would have had a bad bill that have gone through the Senate in the state of Florida. We would have had delayed funding, delayed prioritization of the projects, and again, we're looking at another 10-year delay in Everglades restoration. And the fact that we've been mobilized and we have talented staff at Captains, they identified the issue early. We had great partner in Everglades Foundation who found the issue early, and we were able to mobilize. And it's in no small part a result of having partners like Orvis.
Can someone kind of give a broad overview of Foul the Water and the issue for people? Some people tuning in might not have seen the film, might not be that well versed in the issue. And can someone give a Cliff Notes version of, even though it's a complex issue, give a Cliff Notes version of the situation?
Benny, why don't you go for it, and then we'll fill in the gaps after.
Absolutely. So do you want an overview of what Follow the Water is, or do you want an overview of what's going on in the Everglades?
Well, I think what's going on, and then talk about how Follow the Water kind of can clarify this when somebody sees the film.
Sure. Okay, so the Everglades very naturally over the last 5 to 10,000 years has delivered water from Central Florida, starting in Orlando, through the Kissimmee chain of lakes into Lake Okeechobee, where it very naturally overflowed into the Southern Everglades, percolated in sheet flow form through all of that beautiful sawgrass, and created the most abundant fishery and freshwater brackish estuary in Florida Bay, which the result is very well documented throughout the history in our sport. Saltwater fly fishing was born in Florida Bay. Something like 60 or 70% of all the permit bonefish and tarpon world records are born in Florida Bay. Like, there's no debating which bay had the most influence on saltwater fly fishing. And that was Florida Bay. And it's a direct result of that system that Mother Nature created in Everglades. Some 100 years ago, we had 2 major hurricanes come through South Florida, and the lake overflowed and flooded the nearby farming communities. As a result of draining the swamp, we had these communities that were around the lake, and several thousand people died. And the immediate response from the government, rightfully so, was to dam the lake so that we would prevent further death around the lake for major issues like that. But what they didn't realize was that when they did that, they stopped the water. It stopped flowing from Okeechobee into Southern Everglades, and at that moment is when we started to kill that system. When we started to damage the flow into Florida Bay, when Florida Bay stopped becoming Florida Bay and started becoming this other version of it that we know now, and we started to have the ability to send water east to the St. Lucie River and west and then the Caloosahatchee, further damaging those estuaries, which never got that kind of freshwater flow. And so that's the scenario we're in right now. And the idea of Follow the Water is to actually follow water from Shingle Creek in Orlando through the Kissimmee chain of lakes, through the new restoration project in Kissimmee, into Lake Okeechobee, understand how much water that was, the enormity of that water, the enormity of the lake, and then see where it stopped. And we physically got to see that. And I'm so grateful for having that ability to see it. I've grown up in South Florida. I make my living off of the Everglades. The Everglades literally made me who I am. And I have never seen that water flow south from Shingle Creek. And I was able to see it for the first time. And, it was a life-changing moment for me, because I now have a complete understanding of exactly how that water needs to flow and how important that reservoir is. And I'm so grateful that I have that opportunity, and that we have such an engaged community willing to fight for it.
Hannah, I'll speak to it for a second, but then I know you can give it more commentary. But just building off of what Benny said, you're if you think about the whole bottom half of Florida, which is huge, you have this, like I said, one of the most incredible ecosystems, and it's 240 miles long, and basically humans, through some extraordinary engineering efforts, made the water work as efficiently as possible for humans at that specific time. The environmental cost was immediate, and Hannah, I'll let you talk to it, but I love the stories about how the waterfowl disappeared like that, which was a leading indicator, and then everything followed, and also how they're starting to see it come back when they fix it. But I'll let Hannah talk to it. I love listening to her talk about it, because it's so cool, and it's something that really resonated with her. But basically, so it made it as efficient as possible for humans at that point. All the water in the bottom half of Florida, making it as efficient as possible. The problem is now, not only have we felt the environmental impact, so much so to the point where this ecosystem is on the brink of collapse, but now humans are really starting to feel the impact as well. So you have 9 million people who rely on the Everglades for safe, clean drinking water, and that's at risk. You have a $33 billion outdoor economy in Florida that relies so much on the system. That's at risk. you have, and I think more and more people are feeling how it's impacting them, not just the environment. And so all of a sudden we're creating this thing where any way you look at it, this needs to be fixed, and it needs to be fixed quickly. If we return it as best we can back to how it flowed originally, how this fresh water flowed to feed all these different estuaries and how it all worked in one big system, if we can get it back to just the way it was before, it's how it's going to provide for both humans and that ecosystem in a way that, Hannah, you can speak to it, but in ways that like they're seeing it come back pretty quickly once in these little case studies that are being done throughout the system.
Yeah, I think that was one of the most rewarding parts of the trip was to have multiple examples on our route where you can see the work that's been done in the past. You can see the work that's being done or has been done and the immediate impact of it. I think it was, and Benny, you can quote me if I'm wrong, people chime in the chat if I'm wrong, but I think it was a year ago that the Kissimmee River project was finished, and within that time frame, there's an abundance of bird life. And hearing Mike talk about, right when they did the restoration, it was an immediate response. And prior to, in the past, when they had created this narrow channel on the Kissimmee River for the efforts of, the population, there was an immediate response of there being no birds. And some of those, that was first pointed out by the people who were waterfowl hunters, saying, hey, we're not seeing what we used to see anymore. So I think really impressive how quickly and what a contrast that can be. One of my other favorite moments was going to the reservoir and seeing the stormwater treatment areas. And that is an incredible thought to go through when we think about the dollars, the man hours that were spent to create a safer environment for humans, which impacted, the environment and the livelihood and where these animals can live. We've done all of that work, and then you go to this site, and on driving down a road, and on one side you have a place where they're blowing up dynamite. There's major construction vehicles, so much effort to restore what we need to happen, and it won't be the same as it was, but it's doing what it needs to do to clean the water. So the storm water treatment areas, as the unclean water goes through them, those grasses are cleaning it up, and so it's construction on one side, and then these beautiful just miles of water and grass where there are turtles and birds, and there's so much wildlife right there, and that contrast will stick with me forever and ever and ever. But I think it's very easy to lose sight of something that might happen far in the future, some things that maybe our generation won't even benefit from. And I think it takes a lot of heart from the people like Benny, the guides in the area, captains for clean water. They're owed all the praise for fighting for something that they don't know if they're going to see the impacts of. But these little glimpses, I think, is beautiful evidence that it can have an impact in the future. And our children and our children's children will be able to experience it, hopefully better than we got to experience it. And just a reminder for everyone out there that, even if you might not benefit, it's still worth the effort and the fight, because that next generation deserves it more than we do, or the generations past at this point.
Tom, I think what Hannah spoke to is also one of the things that was most impactful for me being there, which is when you're there, there's plenty about it that can be depressing. I mean, this past weekend I was driving around on Benny's boat with him, and the algae blooms just covering up Florida Bay, and being with people that had visited it when it was a kid and watching them just get deflated, saying this water's like, we're in 2 feet of water and you can't even come close to seeing the bottom, and we should be in the most crystal clear water. And Benny explaining how, you know, the wrong wind at the wrong time will shut down an entire economy that's relying on that water for during the tourist season. But to Hannah's point, like, amidst all this stuff that can be pretty disheartening, very disheartening, there are also just some amazing positive case studies that show that this will work when it's done. And Hannah mentioned another one that I love is listening to Benny talk about how Hurricane Irma was a hurricane that came through at just the right time during the dry season, in just the right way to a certain extent. I mean, there were plenty of devastating things about Irma, but what it did was it almost at the right time, it mimicked what freshwater sheet flow through the Everglades was really going to be like. And listening to Benny and other guides talk about how after Irma, like the speed at which the resource recovered. So nesting populations with shorebirds was just at levels they hadn't seen in so long, and that happened like that. But then from, you know, obviously someone that can't help but think about fishing all day every day, you know, listening to Benny talk and others talk about the spawn that they had and the fish populations, the numbers, everyone, you know, we were talking to guides down there, and that was a year that everybody remembers because the fish population came back like that, and people were having their biggest days as guides, like just huge days. And it was really, really, it's very uplifting hearing that, no, we're not taking a major bet here. This isn't a giant gamble. We have examples of how this is going to work, and we gotta get it there so this starts working, because it's shown us what it can be like, even just with little glimpses of what it's going to be like in the future. Is that, Benny, is that fair? Would you correct any of that?
That's right on the money. And it came on a time, we were in 16 and 17 was right at the very precipice of the darkest time after the grass kill in 2015. We were realizing that our fisheries were not surviving, that and the guides were struggling. Guides who had historically never struggled, who had tons of time in Florida Bay, were struggling to find and catch fish regularly. The algal blooms were at their peak, and the grass was gone, and there was a lot to be very upset about. And then Irma came, and I mean, within months, we had a booming crop of new snook, new redfish, new trout, new tarpon. We had wading birds nesting to the tune of something they've never recorded in over 80 years of recording. It was, without a doubt, Mother Nature saying, look, when you guys see Everglades restoration to fruition, this is what I'm going to give you every single year. And I mean, it was a gift from above for sure. For me, it's all the hope I ever needed. I didn't need hope anyways. I was going to fight no matter what. But like, when you can see that in the ninth inning you're going to hit a grand slam to win the game, it definitely uplifts you. And it's nice to see that. And you saw, Simon, we were there for the press release when we were with Juan, and I asked Juan, who's another guide in Islamorada, who guides out of a bay boat, who absolutely relies on the clarity of the water and the bait, the plentiful bait, and I asked him, you know, how was that year, and his response was the best. And so we can imagine when Everglades restoration is done, that we have similar conditions to that every year. What kind of fishery Florida Bay really could be, and if you can imagine that, you can kind of see what Flip and Chico and those old guys had all of themselves in the 50s, and I'm so jealous, so jealous. I can't even imagine. And we have the ability to put it back something of that nature. It's pretty amazing.
Benny, you have a great scenario that you go through regarding your grandchildren. I think you said it was. Would you like to express? I know you've expressed it many times, but it's very compelling.
Sure. I have 3 daughters, and they grew up in Everglades National Park for the most part. They in their short lifetime, they saw green grass, clean water, plentiful fish. They learned how to fish on my skiff, seeing fish swim around. And when they go there now, they're, you know, they're, you can imagine how impactful it is for a child to see something one way and to fall in love with it and then change completely. And, that certainly is the root of my fight. And I know, and this is what you're getting to, Tom, is I know that at some point I'm going to have a conversation with a grandchild, and it's going to be on Florida Bay, and it can go one of two ways. It's either going to go, this used to be something special, like every other old timer you've ever talked to. This used to be this, and the good old days were that, and it can go that way, or it can go the route of this place is unbelievable and incredible and special because my entire generation, the entire community stood up and fought for it and saved it for you. And I think that's a special situation. I think that's the moment in time that we are realizing right now. You talk to any of the old timers, you talk to Flip and Stu and Chico and all those guys, and they'll tell you that 30, 40 years ago, they didn't think the resource would ever come to an end. They thought the amount of fish was unlimited. And in the last 30, 40 years, we've learned that is not the case. And so we know now that we do not have another 30, 40 years. And so we are at the moment in time where we have the choice to either continue the status quo and pass on nothing to our grandchildren, or do the right thing right now, like we are all doing, and pass on something even better than we have. And I think that's a very unique moment in time that we have to take 2 steps back and realize.
There's a question here. Why is this relevant for people outside of Florida? Simon, I'm going to throw this up to you or Hannah, because here we are, some little tackle company in Vermont, fighting for a fishery that's, I don't know, how 1,500 miles away, that we might see a couple times a year. Why should this be relevant to somebody in California or Oregon or Kansas?
Yeah, it's a great question, Hannah. I'll take a shot at it, but then you can fill in where I missed. But for me, it's really relevant for a number of reasons. Unfortunately, this sport that we all love relies, whether we like to admit it or not, and hopefully we're getting to the point where we all like to admit it, the sport that we love relies on a finite resource. We love this sport because of what it means to us on so many levels. But if we're not, there's so many examples all over the country of where this can quickly, this opportunity that we enjoy, that makes us happy, that makes us healthier, that just kind of consumes us. Forget any of our kids or grandkids or future generations. Like they're examples of where this is going to no longer be there for us if we want to just be selfish about it. And so what this Everglades effort is if we pay attention, if those of us in all the other corners of the country pay attention, it's teaching us some really valuable lessons. And I, in my most critical state, I would say that we can be pretty good at missing lessons that are staring us straight in the face. But this is one that, if we pay attention, there's some great lessons. There are a couple of them. One, much like Pebble Mine, the Everglades is a place where people are really understanding how this has pretty devastating impact and influence. Well, I say devastating, it could be negative, it could be positive, outside of just the environment. You look at, one of the reasons why the needle's really moving on Everglades, on Pebble Mine, on other stuff, is because all of a sudden people are really they're realizing, and in Washington, D.C., they're counting the economic impact of these places. And there are people with small businesses in Florida that all of a sudden are saying, oh no, if something it doesn't happen now, my small business is gone. And unfortunately, like, that risk exists. Maybe people aren't fully aware of it, but that exists in every corner of this country right now. It's becoming more and more prevalent. So there's that piece of it. I think the other piece of it is Benny, Captains for Clean Water, Everglades Foundation. They're also showing us how, if we love this sport, how actually our voice is one of the most powerful tools in preserving this sport. So, Tom, your podcast has millions and millions and millions of downloads, but there are going to be a lot fewer downloads if there are not that many places for people to fish. And again, this is where we rely on a finite resource. So Captains for Clean Water, Everglades Foundation, they're putting together a blueprint that in many ways can be replicated no matter where you are, no matter what resource you love, no matter what fishery you love, no matter what species you love. And they're giving us a chance to, Everglades has been incredibly reactive. The whole Everglades project has been incredibly reactive. They're giving us a chance to actually get out ahead and not have to fight from behind and risk losing everything. And it's a really, really fascinating case study on a number of levels. It's why, Benny came out to our guide rendezvous that we have in Montana, and trout guides in Montana were fascinated about this story because they have real issues that are facing them every single day that they want to start rallying around in much the same way, so that they can maybe even get ahead of some of these things rather than react and make it an uphill battle.
There's a couple other things that are happening here, Tom, that are pretty amazing, that are ancillary positives coming from it. One is the roadblocks that we're kind of mowing down through Everglades restoration efforts in Tallahassee and DC are opening doors for other fishery issues. That's a huge deal. We have a lot of issues within the state of Florida that aren't related to Everglades restoration, and we're seeing progress in those places because we've opened those doors already. And then the other thing, which I think is way more important, is that we are uniting a community. We're uniting guides in Colorado and Alaska, hunters, fishermen, outdoorsmen all over the country around an issue that we've kind of identified as a flagship issue. There's a saying out there, and I never really resonated with me until recently, and it sounds very cliche, but if the Everglades is a test, and if we pass that test, we get to keep the planet. And I think there's a lot of truth there. The Everglades is not only our biggest restoration project, it's our biggest test. And if we can rally our community and start operating as one, we're a $500 billion community in the country. When we speak as one, every legislator in every single form of power should be listening. We are the foundation for a ton of economies, almost every community on every coast, and in every community that abuts a watershed. And I think if we start realizing that power, and we are here in the Everglades, and its ripple effects are going throughout the country, I think we're going to start to see big issues in a lot of other places also see progress, because as a result of us operating as one community. And I think that's like one of the underlying silver linings that we are going to start to realize in the next coming years as the answer for a lot of our problems. And I think it starts right here in the Everglades.
I don't think I have much to add to those. I would say that's the biggest takeaway for me, and I think one of the biggest lessons that can be taught all over is the fact that when you get passionate people together who care about a resource, who specifically care about the sport, it can make an impact. And it's important for those guides, those individuals who are utilizing the waterways, the economies around the waterways, to look at this as a blueprint, like Simon said, and feel free to use it, and help other waterways. I think another takeaway, and just this may be a simple thing that many people know, but I think it's also important to just remember that like saltwater needs fresh water, and it's important for that fresh water to get to the saltwater. I just had one of the best oysters I've ever had in my life, and right before I ate it, the guy said, "We get this oyster from the specific place because of the amount of the fresh water that's dumped in right where they're grown." So aside from fishing, like I love oysters, and that's really important to me. And I think that when you start to look at a global map, you see a lot of blue water on there, and that's a lot of ocean that needs a lot of fresh water. So fresh water can dry up from the inside of, you know, these pieces of land on the globe, and they never make it to the salt. So I think it starts at, you know, that inside point, but
Oh, we lost you,
the
Hannah.
fresh water everywhere.
We lost your
Oh,
last couple of
bummer.
statements. Sorry, you blipped there. Want to restate it?
Yeah, I don't know where I left off, but I'll round back on just saying that, you know, it's really important for the ocean to get fresh water. And looking at a globe, there's a lot of ocean water out there that needs to have fresh water dumped into it. So protecting the fresh water all over the nation and all over the world, you know, no matter how inland it gets, it matters because they're all flowing somewhere.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. The term brackish water almost sounds negative, but it's so critical to so many ecosystems and the life cycle of so many ocean species: tarpon, snook, redfish, bonefish. We got to think up a new term. Brackish is not a good term.
It should be more like nourish.
Yeah, nourish water. There you go.
I want to drink that.
I don't know if you want to drink it, but you'll want to eat oysters from it.
That's for sure.
That's fair.
Yeah, going back to the movie, I think one of the most compelling images in that film, well, there were a lot of them, but the one that really resonates to me was that aerial shot of the Kissimmee River, the way it is now, with all the natural bends where you know that water is flowing underground, in between those bends being cleaned, and there's lots of habitat there. And then the aerial view shows the old channel, which was just a ditch. I mean, that, to me, that was just so striking. And I don't think there's been enough publicity about that project.
Tom, I love that you brought that up, because Simon and I were in the car driving there, and when you're on the ground, you don't get that aerial view. And so as Simon was being a fantastic driver for most of the trip, there were some moments, but I got to, zoom out on the map and kind of see where we were going. And when we looked, it's really, you see it's the middle section of that river that's restored. So even when you look at it as a full flow, it's a straight channel, and then you get the wiggly curves of the natural water flow, and then again another straight channel. And it was just really incredible, driving down the road and imagining where we're going and what it's going to look like when we walk up to it, and having that view on the map. I definitely was a huge impact site for me as well.
It's funny, Tom, that point you just made that Hannah just talked about, it kind of relates to the previous question as far as why is this relevant? And again, sometimes stuff is just staring us straight in the face, and we miss it. I know I miss it, but I think about what you just described. That straight narrow channel was created again, as like Benny was talking about, to protect people from flooding and other things. And I think about Vermont, and we had no one really thinks about hurricanes in Vermont, but yet You know, when Hurricane Irene came through, we had devastating flooding, and the response was to go in and try to do these incredible engineering feats, and we ended up with a lot of rivers that were all of a sudden straight and narrow and had lost their meandering, and we've seen the impact that has on fishing. And so again, we might think this doesn't affect us, but like there are almost literal case studies that we've done in Vermont what they tried to do in Florida decades ago, and we did the same thing. And I think we're starting to understand there's so many ways in which we can do this better, where there aren't going to be the long-term consequences. Places around the country are showing us the real consequences and are giving us the chance to say, okay, we can learn from this, we can do this differently, and we can do it so it's a lot better, so it doesn't come at the cost.
Mm-hmm. You know, we've been talking a lot about the Everglades and Florida Bay, but there's two other systems here that have been positively affected: the Caloosahatchee estuary and the St. Lucie estuary, and those are the places that had the toxic algae blooms that made national news a couple of years ago. And Benny, you were saying when Benny and I did a podcast, which will be out on Friday, that those ecosystems are recovering because they're not getting the fresh water that they don't need. They don't want the fresh water, or not as much. You want to talk a little bit about how those two ecosystems are recovering and the fishing is getting better and the water's healthier?
Yes, absolutely. So there's three major fisheries within the Everglades, within the exact Everglades system: the Caloosahatchee, the St. Lucie, and then Florida Bay. The Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie are saltwater systems. Where the freshwater they typically get is from rain, but never from the Everglades. So they will naturally repair much faster because they're in a saltwater situation right now already. They exist in saltwater, and so just by eliminating the freshwater, they can recover. In Florida Bay, we need to get a certain amount of freshwater in the dry season before we can even start to recover. So the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie River are experiencing what we say good summers now in the last 4 years, and as a result, we are seeing grass grow back for the first time. The bait comes back immediately, and whenever you have habitat regrowth and bait replenishment, then the forage fish, the predator fish that we seek they explode. It only takes a spawn season or two for us to have great fishing again. And it's just a good example of when we help Mother Nature do what she wants to do, she rebounds very quickly. I'm super hopeful in Florida Bay for similar results. No one alive has ever seen a free flowing water in the dry season in the Everglades. No one's ever seen it. The closest we've ever seen is Irma in 2017, and we know the results of that. So I can't wait to see flow coming from a newly constructed reservoir in the dry season when the Florida Bay that I know and love has never seen that. I can only imagine the results, and you can extrapolate from what we're experiencing in the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie as an example of what's going to happen in Florida Bay. And when that day happens, I pray that I can get Hannah and Simon back down here so we can do a follow-up on Follow the Water. It'll be more like Follow the Fish, and we can follow fish all day long and catch some fish.
Can I come on that one?
Yes, you should come on that one. You should come on that one. And one statement that Flip grew up down here, and he fell in love with the Everglades. That's what got him into fishing in the first place. And he had this one line that really resonated with me, and it was, "There will be a day when Everglades restoration is functioning to the point where you can smell the sweet water coming out of the mangroves into Florida Bay." And I hope that I'm alive to experience that with you. And so immediately you start, when you have like a sensory explanation or example like smell, I immediately think of when I'm deep in Hell's Bay or deep in Lane Bay, and you can really, it's a different smell. the water is sweet, and I've never experienced that anything near Florida Bay, and Flip had. And so to understand that, it was a it was a it was something that really struck deep inside, and I can't imagine what that day will be like. But finally, we are at the point where we can see a little bit of that light at the end of that tunnel. The reservoir has got record funding. We have new prioritization on construction. We've got permits for the first time, and an engaged, educated community that's willing to fight at the drop of a hat to make sure that happens. And I can see that light, and it's pretty darn special.
And it's going to continue to be a fight, right? It's going to require constant vigilance. We can't just okay, we did it, it's over.
For sure.
Things are going to crop up, and all of us need to pay attention to those things.
Yeah, what happened in February with 2508 is a perfect example of that. We anticipated nothing from this legislative session. We anticipated smooth sailing. We had a tremendous amount of support last year across both aisles. Some incredible funding on the horizon. Never imagined it, and we didn't take the eye off the ball, thankfully, and we were able to catch it. But it's just a perfect example. I mean, at any moment in time, things can change very quickly, and we have to keep our eye on the ball. And as Simon said, this is a blueprint for other situations across the country, across the planet, that once you start to see progress, you absolutely have to stay engaged and aware and eye on the ball and see it all the way through if we want to see these things ever see fruition.
I see we have a bunch of comments from the audience. Do we have any questions for any of the members of the panel? Questions about this topic? Let's not talk about bimini twists or what tarpon fly to use today. We'll do that some other time. But does anybody have any questions about the film, about the issue for our panelists today? We've got about 5 minutes left, so.
Tom, can we tell a story about our epic gas situation in the Everglades?
This was a good one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
We love stories.
We went a little off script in this part of the video, but this part wasn't in the plans, not a part of the agenda.
Yeah, so some of the backstory is we had talked earlier about how this place was really, really special to our grandfather. And so Hannah and I actually brought down some of his ashes because we knew how special of a place the Everglades was. And on the last night filming, when we were done, the sun was setting. There's a huge storm that was on the horizon rolling in, creating a really dramatic sunset. We couldn't fish because we knew we had to rush back, but they were rolling tarpon, and we were trying not to pay attention to the rolling tarpon. We sprinkled our grandfather's ashes. It was a very special and emotional moment. Hannah and I gave each other a big hug, and then we started back. And we had maybe a 30-minute ride back. And so Benny, Hannah, and I are in the boat, and everyone else takes off in the bigger bay boat, and they're going faster, and we're enjoying it. It's a pretty special moment. We each have a beer, and we're sort of we're taking it all in. It's our last night there. It's pretty special. And we're going along, and it's going, and all of a sudden the engine just goes and cuts out. And Benny goes, what the hell is that? And I go, I know exactly what that was, because unfortunately I had heard that sound before, and it was the sound of an engine running out of gas when you're in the middle of the ocean. And luckily we had Hannah there, because Hannah found all the joy and positivity in the moment, where Benny's sitting there saying like, oh no, are we going to be spending the night out here? And we have no cell reception, we have nothing. I'm looking at Hannah. She's loving it because, it's memorable. It's searing. And we said our grandfather loved playing practical jokes. And so we were saying this was him playing a practical joke on us. And then we were sitting there and finished our beer, and started getting darker. It started getting darker, and we're like, that the other boat's going to come back for us, right? And it got darker, and no sign of them, and still no cell service, and we're just floating along, but luckily they came and saved us and towed us back, which was kind of a really nice memorable way to end the trip.
Well, I have been in the Everglades with your grandfather, and that is exactly something that would happen on one of his trips. Or worse, believe me.
Yeah, exactly.
For me, it stood out because of the two distinctly different reactions from the Perkins people in my boat. One was, I know exactly what that is, and the other was, this is awesome.
It's an adventure.
Stories to tell. We had sandwiches and beer, so we were like fine.
We were gonna survive we could probably survive for at least 3 or 4 days.
For sure.
Yeah.
That storm was an aggressive storm driving out that we were, maybe that was Grandpa being like, haha, joke, but you guys don't worry, I'm not going to make you sit in this insane lightning, thunder, and windstorm.
Did the storm miss you?
Yes.
We made it out, like, I don't know, within 5 minutes of the storm hitting the parking lot. But I remember on the way out, driving out of there, thinking like we might just have to pull over and stop for a little while because the rain was just hitting the windshield so hard. And that was the moment where I was like, that was a cool adventure. I'm glad we didn't have to live it too long.
If they had found us 30 minutes later than when they did, we would have gotten crushed out there.
Absolutely.
Well, I see we have one question from my friend Roger Bird, who is a loyal Orvis fly tying and live event watcher. And he asked, are the effects of Irma still ongoing? And this is very interesting coming from Roger because his wife's name is Irma. So Roger, I'm not quite sure what you're asking. But,
literally or figuratively?
No, his wife's name is Irma. But are the effects still ongoing, or did they dissipate after a year or so, Benny?
Yeah, so great question, and the answer is yes and yes. Without a doubt, we know how fast snook, redfish, trout grow, and we know how what their life duration is. We absolutely are still benefiting from Irma now, almost 5 years later. However, another underlying message, again to Simon's point, we do not have the habitat to sustain that type of influx of recruitment class. We just don't have the habitat to support that many snook, that many redfish, that many trout. And while we enjoyed it very much so in 2017 when it happened, every year it's gotten the fisheries have become a little less and a little less. And because our habitat acreage or coverage and range is not there to sustain it. So great news is Mother Nature can replenish very quickly. The other great news is that we're learning a lesson in the direct correlation with the amount of habitat that's available and the abundance of fisheries. And so yes, we are still benefiting. I'm still so grateful for Irma, and I tell that story all the time. For the benefits of hope, but also the benefits of understanding that the habitat is crucial if we want to have a successful fishery in the future.
Well, I know you're grateful to Irma. Roger is grateful to Irma.
I'm sure.
And we've kind of hit I don't see any more questions. We've kind of hit our time here. And just want to thank the three of you for sharing your time and for making this spectacular film educational and beautiful and heartwarming and touching. We all thank you for bringing this very important issue to the forefront.
Thanks for having us, Tom.
Thanks for having us,
Thank
Tom.
you so much for having us.
Great group to hang out with. So nice to see all these faces. Thanks for everybody who tuned in.
And for those of you who are podcast listeners, Benny and I do have a podcast, and we touched on a lot of different subjects, so it's not just a repeat of what we talked about here. We went on and on about a number of things. So anyway, that'll be out Friday on the podcast feed. And thanks to everyone for your questions and for tuning in today. We really appreciate it. We're glad that you're as concerned as we are about this very important issue. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, guys.